Hello once again. Today I have to show you something really cool I picked up for $5 at an estate sale a couple of days ago. This is an Emerson model VCR765 VHS VCR, and it was made in 1990 by Orion. This is an Orion built VCR, and I find that really cool. I didn't even know Orion was making VCRs for the North American market this early. So this is a really cool find, and I picked it up just because it's just a lowly 2-head mono VCR, but this thing is so retro cool. I love the design, and that's why I picked it up. I'm a sucker for any VCR that's old enough to be back when VCRs had that really cool high-tech design, regardless of whether or not the VCR is actually, you know, a high-grade unit with 4 heads and hi-fi stereo or whatever. When I saw the Facebook ad that the person running the estate sale had posted, and this was in one of the photos, I knew I just had to have it. There were several VCRs in the photos there, but when I actually got to the estate sale, they had sold all of them except this one, the one I wanted, so that's pretty darn lucky. My guess would be people who, you know, whoever went there that wanted VCRs snapped up the newer ones. All the rest of them were you know, newish ones from the 2000s. My guess is they figured that the newer ones had the best chance of working rather than this old unit. But that sure worked out for me. So let's take a look at this thing. This is a 2-head mono deck. Shown here, it's got the HQ specification. Kind of funny that they're advertising front loading system. I mean, top loading VCRs had become obsolete by like 1984, 85, so it's kind of funny that they were still advertising this in 1990, or boasting about it. There's your power button. It lights up when power is turned on. And what's very cool about this VCR is that it's 95% front panel programmable. You can do almost everything from the front panel, which is awesome. The only thing you need the remote for is to show the tape counter and to change tape recording speed. I didn't get a remote with this, unfortunately, but I'll still be able to demonstrate all 3 recording speeds when we do the recording test later in this video, because as it turns out, when you set a recording program, you can choose from the front panel what speed you want the program to record at, so that's one way to get around that. This is a manual tracking VCR. You've got your tracking wheel right there. And this does have a built-in cable tuner, so you've got this switch here to choose whether the cable tuner's just going to be tuning into standard over-the-air television or a cable system. I do not know. I assume STD means standard. I do not know what HRC or IRC mean, but those are different cable television modes. Button to set the clock, and then a general cancel reset button that could be used for any number of functions. There's your display, a yellow VFD display. I love that. And you may remember my other Orion built VCR, my Memorex MVR4046 from 1998. That has a yellow VFD display. So evidently yellow VFD displays were just a specialty of Orion. 2-week 4 programs. So you can set up to 4 recording programs, and you can set them as far ahead as 2 weeks. You can set daily programs, programs that occur 1 day a week every week, and a couple other combinations. Here's your tape transport controls. You do have OTR recording, so if you press the record button multiple times, you could choose how long to record automatically, half hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. And you've got program and enter buttons for when you're setting a recording program or when you're setting the clock. It's great that you can set the clock without the need for the remote. And you have a timer recording button. Oddly, when you set a recording program, you have to activate the recording program after you've set it by hitting the timer record button. And then a little clock indicator will show up in the corner of the display. The display is a bit worn out, you can see. When power is turned off, you only see the clock and the day of the week. I love that it shows the day of the week. Turn the power on and you get the cable tuner channel and the record speed. And you can see that's much brighter than the clock. So this display is worn right out, and it's not the cathode; it's just the phosphor itself has just worn out from use. So the display is a little bit on the dim side, but it's still visible and working just fine. Looking around the back, we have our composite AV input and output. We also have a coaxial RF input and output, your channel 3 or 4 RF output switch. And I thought this to be very weird, but this is evident. This was just standard on Orion VCRs in the 80s and early 90s. There's actual twin lead connectors for a UHF antenna. So you would hook up your UHF antenna over here, and that would allow the VCR to tune into UHF over the air channels. And you would have a pass-through to the UHF input on your television, so that when the VCR was turned off, you could just tune your UHF channels through your television set. A very interesting feature. You know, normally you would just have the coax for everything, but Orion actually put appropriate connectors for both VHF and UHF antennas on there. Very neat. And there's our sticker, Emerson model VCR765. Emerson was Orion's biggest VCR customer. Emerson was essentially the distributor for Orion VCRs in North America throughout the basically from the mid 80s up until like the early 2000s, and it was made in Thailand. So let's open the cover and take a look at the mechanism. To remove the cover, there's two screws, one here, and then the cover just lifts off. On each side there's these two little guides that the cover has to slide into, so it can be a little tricky to get off, and it's especially tricky to get back on. Get this off here. It's definitely a two-handed job. Alright. So I was very interested to see what an early Orion VCR mechanism was like. I've never owned an Orion VCR made this early, but I've had two other Orion VCRs, or I have one other right now, and I used to own another one, and both of them are just fantastic VCRs. The very first VCR I ever owned, I got it for Christmas in 2001 at the age of 7 actually. It was a Citizen brand VCR. It was a two-head mono Orion built VCR, and that thing was fantastic. It lasted me 10 years of very heavy, very heavy recording use, in addition to playback use, before I finally gave it to the thrift store when I just lost interest in having it. Now I've got my Memorex MVR4046, a slightly older Orion VCR from 1999, and that thing's fantastic. When I picked that up at a thrift store, it worked perfect right away. Well, almost. All I had to do was clean the belt. The belt was slipping, the loading belt, and probably the mechanism was a little bit stiff from disuse, and that's why the belt was slipping. But after I did that, it's been working perfectly ever since, and it's actually my go-to VCR for archival work. It's a 4-head hi-fi stereo VCR, and it's my standard VCR for doing important work. But now I've got this thing, an older Orion mechanism, and I've been very interested to see what it's like. Well, I can say first of all, this mechanism is quite interesting. Second of all, it's great. It's fantastic. All I had to do to get this thing working was this had the exact same problems. The loading belts were slipping. Now, the Orion mechanisms from the early 2000s and probably until the mid 2000s, they used just one belt. They had a capstan belt, and the loading and everything was done through a series of gears and cams and everything else. My Memorex MVR4046 from 1999, the Orion mechanism in that has two belts. There's the capstan belt, or it's a direct drive capstan, but the belt is used to drive the idler mechanism for the reels. And then it's got a second belt that's the loading belt. Well, this thing is a sort of similar arrangement, except instead of the loading mechanism having just one belt, it's got three. Take a look at this. So your loading motor's way in the back corner here, which that just seems to be an Orion thing, kind of funny. but it's got 3 belts on it. It's got 2 in the front and then 1 in the back. And so your first belt just connects the motor to this pulley, and then the pulley's got 1 belt on it that connects to this long shaft here, which goes through a worm gear and a series of other gears, and that does the eject mechanism, the inject and eject of the tape. But then it's got a pulley back here, and that connects to another long shaft on the underside of the mechanism that we'll see when we take the bottom panel off, which you can do in this VCR. It's actually, there's no circuit board under the deck here, so you can actually service the bottom of the deck without having to take it out. But that pulley goes to a long shaft that runs the entire length of the mechanism on the underbelly, and that drives the series of sub-mechanisms that load the tape around the head and everything else. Very interesting mechanism, a little bit on the complex side. And so it took a little bit of time to get this working, just because all 3 of these belts were slipping. And I assume that's not just because of the belts being, you know, dry or dirty or whatever, but also just because the mechanism was a little stiff. It was a little bit of a pain because once I got all 3 belts cleaned up enough that they were all working without slipping, the mechanism was actually out of time, because this part of the mechanism would be in the fully ejected position, in the rest position with no tape like it is right now, but the sub-mechanism driven by this back pulley would be in a position as if the tape was loaded. So when you powered the VCR on, the motor would try to spin to get the underside of the mechanism in the rest position, but this part of the mechanism was already in the rest position, so the whole thing would just jam up and the motor would stall, and the VCR would have no idea what the hell was going on, so it just turned itself off. So that was kind of weird. So what I actually had to do was I had to remove this belt to keep this mechanism from spinning, turn the VCR on, and then the motor would only be driving the underside mechanism, which would bring that part of the mechanism into the rest position, and then everything was fine. I could put this belt back on, and everything's been working fine since. So yeah, kind of a caveat of so many belts just for loading is that if one belt slips, it's 2 different mechanisms that have to stay in time, and if one belt slips, the 2 mechanisms are going to go out of time with each other. So that's sort of a caveat of that, but it is easily fixed, so not too terribly bad. And since I cleaned the belts and let the mechanism retime itself, I've had 0 issues with all the testing I've put this VCR through. It's been working perfectly. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. With the later Orion mechanisms, you just had the 1 belt, and it drove this eject mechanism, and the rest of the mechanism was driven off of gears. So they kind of simplified it later. Based on the research I've gone into, I haven't been able to, you know, find absolutely concrete, 100% pinpointed information, but from what information I can find, which goes through viewing YouTube videos, looking at FCCID lookup codes, from what I can find, Orion used this mechanism from 1989 to 1995, which is a really long lifespan for a VCR mechanism, which is kind of impressive. The only other VCR mechanism I can think of that had that long of a lifespan was the Panasonic G mechanism. With that said, Orion was still using this mechanism when they overhauled the design of the VCRs to a modern deck-on-board design. Like this VCR, the deck is not connected to a circuit board. All the circuitry's over here and back here, so that's why the bottom of the deck is serviceable. But they were still using this mechanism when they did switch to a modern deck-on-board design where the deck plugs in to connectors on the circuit board. I would assume that there was some redesigns to this deck to make it possible, like instead of having cables and wiring being routed down to the circuit boards, they just had connectors on the bottom of the deck. So I believe they did make some modifications to the deck to adapt it to a deck-on-board design, but otherwise the mechanism itself, the mechanical portions, are exactly the same. So yeah, very interesting. Oh, also, this mechanism was not limited to standard 120 volt powered VCRs. Orion also used this very mechanism for 12 volt VCRs for automotive use, and they were sold under the Emerson name. And Orion also built this mechanism into TV VCR combo machines, which were also sold under the Emerson name. So this mechanism got a ton of mileage. It was made for a long time and used in a ton of different products. So I have to say, if all those eggs were put in this VCR mechanism's basket, it must be a decent mechanism. And everything that I've read and watched on YouTube and stuff suggests that this is indeed a very good VCR mechanism. I've always considered Orion to be one of my favorite, if not my favorite, VCR manufacturers. The two newer Orion VCRs that I've owned, their mechanisms are just bulletproof. Nothing ever goes wrong with them. They never break. And so I would not be surprised if this older Orion mechanism is just the same. So I'm really glad to have an older Orion built machine in my fleet of VCRs now, and I look forward to using this VCR and seeing how long it works in the long run. So continuing to look around the mechanism, there's your audio and control heads, there's your erase head, and your head drum. Interesting head drum design. You actually have 4 wires running up to the little circuit board on top of the head drum, coming from the 2 heads. There's 1, and there's 2, and there's some dark gray gunk around the bottom of the head drum. I've tried cleaning it off and it won't come off, but the VCR is working just fine, so I guess I won't worry about it. Oh, something else I forgot, and this is hilarious. I have never seen this before. The head drum was seized when I got this thing. Seriously, the head drum wouldn't spin. You know, I was spending all my time sorting out the belt issues, and then I realized as I'm putting a tape in that it's playing the tape, but the head drum isn't spinning. The head drum was actually seized, which I've never seen before. All I had to do was spin it by hand. I guess it just got stuck from years of not being used. I just had to nudge it by hand, and it came to life, and it spins perfectly fine. It's not stiff or anything, as you can see. There's your idler. It's an idler gear. Oh, and I replaced most of the grease on this mechanism. The grease for the, all the parts of the mechanism that move. New grease where the idler moves. The old grease was black and kind of gummy, so I cleaned it all up with Q-tips and alcohol. I went through a couple dozen Q-tips and then replaced it with white lithium grease. The grease here looks a gray color. I think it's just mixed with whatever remaining grease was on the bottom of these moving parts of the mechanism. But it's not gummy anymore. It's actually greasy now, so that's good. Other miscellaneous things about the mechanism: it is a direct drive capstan, and you have the one belt on the bottom that goes from the capstan to the idler to drive the reels. The pinch roller is luckily in excellent shape. I was worried, this being a 29-year-old VCR, I felt the pinch roller. It's perfectly rubbery. It's very, very nice. My RCA VPT292, my Hitachi-built VCR from 1987 with a completely hard pinch roller, that's always made me really weary about pinch rollers, but somebody told me that rotten pinch rollers, as far as VCRs are concerned, rotten pinch rollers are an exclusively Hitachi thing. Hitachi just used a really poor rubber formulation, and that's why Hitachi VCRs always have bad belts, and apparently it's super common on Hitachi VCRs to have completely rock hard pinch rollers that make it unserviceable. But the pinch roller on this is really, really nice and rubbery still, so that's good. A linear power supply, very nice to see. And apparently Orion was still using linear power supplies when the end of this mechanism came around 1995, so that's very interesting. I don't know of any other manufacturer that was still using a linear power supply that late in the game. And it's funny because Orion was still doing this when they had modernized their VCRs with the deck on board design and the deck placed in the center of the VCR instead of to the left. So you had the linear power supply stuffed on the left side of the units. That's kind of interesting. Here's the RF section. You've got this little ribbon cable leading to the twin lead connectors. And then here's the bulk of the circuitry. You've got a daughter board here, lots of capacitors, Rubicon capacitors, which is nice to see. And no mistake about who made this VCR. There's a few Orion custom ICs on here. So very neat. So let me put in a tape. This BASF tape is now my test tape because that RCA, that Samsung built RCA VCR that I got recently absolutely mangled this tape. I forget if I mentioned it or not, but in case people don't know, that VCR is gone now. I actually threw it away. I discovered, you know, and it's too bad, I feel really dumb now because I praised the Samsung mechanism just because it seemed like such a nice mechanism. Well, I found its Achilles heel with those Samsung mechanisms, and that is if the tape has the slightest bit of damage on it, like the tiniest crinkle, it makes the mechanism go absolutely bat crap crazy. The cap stand stops spinning, the reel stops spinning, even the head drum stalls. I don't know what it is, but just the tiniest crinkle, seriously, in the tape caused the mechanism to go completely crazy. It completely mangled the tape further, which, you know, only worsened the problem. And yeah, I was quite horrified when I saw that because this was my favorite VHS tape. I never use it for anything. Oh well, I have others like it. And yeah, I threw that VCR away. No way, no how. If a VCR, in my mind, if a VCR can't deal with a slightly damaged tape, then it's not worth staying in my collection. And you know, I didn't want to give it away because, you know, donate it to a thrift store, because Dollar to Donuts is somebody would pick it up. And as long as they used a perfectly healthy tape in it, it would be fine. But the instant they put a slightly damaged tape in it, with even a half a second of damage on the tape, they were going to be in for a really cruel surprise. So I just tossed it. Sad to do that to an otherwise fine working VCR, but that was a pretty severe problem. This VCR does not have that problem. It'll happily chew through a damaged tape. It just powers right through it. So I'll put the tape in here. We'll observe the mechanism. In typical Orion fashion, the loading motor is very buzzy, so you'll hear that that standard Orion motor buzziness when it loads the tape. Okay, and it is a quick play mechanism, so it loads the tape around the head. I made a mistake on Twitter when I tweeted about finding this VCR. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get announcements about finds like this before I make the video. I tweeted that this VCR had sort of a half quick play, it seemed, where when the tape was stopped, it would keep the tape loaded around the head, but the head drum would spin down. That was totally wrong. I don't know what made me think I had observed that. That's not the case. This VCR is a standard quick play VCR. You can see the head drum is spinning, the tape is wrapped around the head, and the tape is stopped. For as long as the tape is in and the power's turned on, it'll keep the tape wrapped around the head, although it will spin down the head, and I think it retracts the tape back into the cassette after a few minutes of sitting here like this doing nothing. So I'll eject the tape here. And I'll put the tape in again and just let you observe this mechanism, because it's kind of interesting. So I'll focus on this part here. And I'll eject it. Very interesting. So I'll put the tape in again. And we'll play the tape. tape is now playing. We'll do a forward search here. Oh, and also in typical Orion fashion, although I'm surprised that they had this feature this early in the game, it's actually, you can do a 2-speed search. So if I press forward search again, it goes a little bit faster. I press it again, and it slows back down. Very cool. Press play again. And when I do a reverse search, it has to run the loading motor a bit beforehand. Once again, 2 speeds. Hit play. Oh, I should show the display, so I'll eject the tape. So here's the display. I'll put in the tape. Got a little tape inserted indicator. And it's very cool. It's got enunciators for the tape transport. So I hit play, and you get a nice big play indicator. If I do a forward search, you see a little forward search or a little fast forward indicator blink there. Same for reverse search. Hit stop. It shows the speed that's selected. It defaults to SP, and I can't change that because I don't have the remote, but I can temporarily change it for a program, for a recording program when I program that recording. I'll do a rewind and fast forward here. I'll hit fast forward. And there you go. It's a very gentle fast forward and rewind, not terribly fast. And it keeps the tape wrapped around the head while it does it. I don't really like that, but that's just the way it went. All VCRs went this way after a while. I'll do a rewind. It's a bit noisier when it rewinds. I'm not sure why. I greased everything I could find. Just must be the way it is. Good brakes on the reels. It stops immediately when you hit the stop button. And I'll eject here, and you can see when I hit eject, the tape indicator blinks while it's in the process of ejecting. Oh, something really strange about this VCR I've got to mention. So it's got the composite AV input on the back. There is no way to switch. Not even with the remote. There is no way to switch between the cable tuner or the AV input. How this VCR works is that it's always inputting through the cable tuner unless something is plugged into the AV input, and then it always goes through the AV input. So if you have something plugged into the AV input, the VCR assumes that you always want to use the AV input, and there's no way to go to the cable tuner. That's a very strange design. It works out for me because I'm never going to use the cable tuner. I'm always going to use the AV input. But I can imagine a possibility back in the day of this VCR where somebody, for example, had a video game system plugged in through the AV input on this VCR because, you know, there were a lot of TVs still in use that had no RCA jacks on them at all, only a coaxial input. So somebody may have had a video game system plugged into the AV input on this VCR, but they also had a cable. They also used the cable tuner with cable TV plugged into the cable tuner on this thing, and there would have been no way to switch between them. With the video game system plugged in, the VCR would have always been tuned to the video game system. The only way to switch back to the cable tuner would be to unplug the video game system, and that's very poor design. If I'm missing something, somebody let me know, but based on what I have seen, that's how it works, and that's kind of dumb. That's the only really dumb thing about this VCR. Very quirky, very interesting. But luckily for me, I'm only ever going to use the AV input, so it works out for me. We're looking at the underside of the machine now. To take the bottom panel off, there's 6 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the bottom panel just pulls off. And there is the underside of the mechanism. So there's the fourth belt going from the capstan to the idler mechanism to drive the reels. There's the bottom end of the head drum. And down here is another long shaft that extends the entire length of the mechanism. It's driven by that belt at the back end of the shaft driven by the motor. And something I personally would never notice, just because I'm not knowledgeable in this sort of thing, but other people have noticed that's apparently a really unusual design with this particular Orion mechanism, is it's got two of these cam gears to do the mechanism. Like this cam gear does the action of pulling the tape around the head, and then this cam gear, it doesn't drive the idler because the idler switches back and forth by the direction of the capstan motor. But this cam gear does drive the mode switch, and I have heard a couple of examples of the mode switch stopping working on this mechanism just because it's dirty, and you have to clean the mode switch by taking this board off. It's a little bit of a scary sounding procedure to me, especially because I've had a bad experience with putting a mode switch out of alignment on a VCR, that Indonesian built Panasonic with the tape inject issue. I just completely wasn't knowledgeable about mode switches and putting them at a time and stuff, and I completely destroyed that VCR of my own accord. But I have, on that RCA VCR, the one that I've since junked, I was able to successfully completely remove the mechanism and put it back in without messing the mode switch timing or anything else up. But yeah, I guess you have to remove this circuit board and then you can get to the mode switch to clean it, and that's actuated by this cam gear, and this cam gear does other stuff, I'm not sure what, but yeah, you've got this long shaft with these two worm gears that actuate these two cam gears, and apparently that's quite an unusual design. Well, I can tell just looking at it, it's quite unusual. I've never seen a VCR mechanism like this. And it's kind of scary because if one of these worm gears or cam gears were to jump timing, it would throw the whole mechanism right off, I would imagine, because the pins that wrap the tape around the head, they would be out of alignment with the mode switch, and yeah, I can imagine all sort of havoc would be wrecked if one of these were to jump timing. But luckily, I've never seen any report of that actually happening. There's a solenoid up there, and yeah, I'll put a tape in. I'll observe the mechanism from beneath. And yeah, all I had to do was clean this belt too. All four belts in this thing are good. You know, they're totally fine. They're not slack or going rotten or anything. They just had to be cleaned just because they were slipping a bit, although that also could have been due to the mechanism being a bit stiff just from disuse. But I'll put a tape in. Oh crap. Oh, it did not like that. Maybe it doesn't like to be operated on its side. There we go. Oh yeah, it's out of time now. And it shut itself off. There we go. Yeah, that's that seems to be a thing that it seems to be sort of a quirk just out of the design of this thing, because of the way the belt, the way two separate mechanisms which have to be in time are both driven by separate belts. Is that if one mechanism sticks, it causes it causes it to go out of time with the other mechanism. But luckily, it seems to correct itself. You just have to power cycle it. So the tape is now engaged, and you can see that, let me turn this towards the light here. You can see the mechanism driven by this set of gears, which goes off this linkage, which gets driven by this worm gear, ultimately. Oops. To load the tape, I'll turn the power off. I'll do that again. I'll do it again from this side. show it from the worm gear side here. Yeah, very interesting mechanism. I'll do an eject here. So there's that. So that's pretty much all the show. Like I said, it's certainly a very unique mechanism. The complexity with all the worm gears and cam gears and stuff would make one a little bit worried, but like I said, I've found no reports of these failing mechanically. The only failures I've heard of are a dirty mode switch and my own experience of the belt slipping. Other than that, any issues with the mechanism going out of time because of a belt slippage, the VCR pretty much corrects itself with a power cycle. If it doesn't, all you have to do is take the offending belt off and then power cycle it and let the other belt put the rest of the mechanism back in time. So it seems to be a perfectly fine mechanism, not at least to date, not plagued by mechanical issues despite its complexity. Very interesting. So I'm going to put this back together and then we will finally test this thing. Alright, we are now recording on the Emerson VCR765 two-head mono VCR from 1990, made by Orion. Because this is a two-head mono VCR, the quality of the recording is going to be a direct function of how fast the tape is moving. So as I test the slower speeds, LP and EP, the quality of the recording is going to get noticeably worse. But here we are, working just fine. So now I'll switch to the LP speed, and as I said earlier in the video, I can't do that directly because I don't have the remote for this thing. So what I have to do is set a recording program and set the speed as LP in the program. So what I'll do next is show how to make a program on this thing, and then we'll continue with the recording demonstration. So it's currently 9:18 p.m. I'm going to set a recording program to begin at 9:20. So, let's make that 9:21 just to give me a bit of leeway here. But we hit the program button, and then we use the channel buttons to set everything. So, like this is a daily program. It'll start at the same time every day. You can exclude Sunday, Saturday, if you want to. There's a weekly program, record at this time every Saturday, and you can set a weekly program for every day of the week. And I'll go forward here, I'm going backwards. So there's your daily programs, and then your 1 week program. Record this on Sunday next week, or any day of the week, and record this on Sunday 2 weeks from now, or any day of the week. And then you're back at the weekly. So I'm just going to set a daily program here. And I'm going to hit enter. And what's the start time? I want to start at, you know what, I already forget what time it is. It's 9:20. I'm going to set it for 9:22. Just give me a bit of leeway here. So we're going to set 9:22. Notice when we hold the button, the time changes in 10-minute increments. Very nice. I'm going to hit enter, and it can end on whatever time, as long as it gives me enough time to do the demonstration. 12:17 a.m. is certainly enough, because we can manually stop the recording. And then I'm going to hit enter, and then we choose the speed, EP, LP, SP. I'm going to choose LP, hit enter. And what channel do we want to record from? I could choose anything, it doesn't matter, because it's going to record from the AV input, because something will be plugged into the AV input. Hit enter, and that's it. That's our recording program. If I hit program, it'll review. Actually, I think the power's going to be turned off. So if I hit program with the power turned off, it'll review all the programs, the start time, the end time. and it'll go through all 4 programs. I don't have anything programmed for the other programs. I'll just hit program to stop that, or there we go. And the recording program won't activate until I hit timer record. So I gotta hit timer record, and there, it's got the little clock in the corner, and the recording program is set. I'll actually keep filming here. Oh, there we go. And it's recording, so it actually starts 1 minute beforehand. And it's recording now. So, and it tells you why it's recording. It says this is program 1 recording. It's got the little clock there. And I can actually not only stop the recording program, but restart it in the middle. If I hit timer record, it stops recording, but if I hit it again, it'll restart the recording. Very nice. So let me plug my camcorder back into this thing, and we will continue the recording demonstration in LP. We are now recording in LP. Video and audio quality will be slightly reduced. But as you can see, working just fine. I wonder if I can modify the program while it's recording. I cannot. So I gotta stop the recording here, then set a recording for EP, and we'll continue in EP. Okay, and we're now recording in EP. The slowest speed, video and audio quality are gonna be at their lowest. But here we are anyhow. Finally, to end this recording demonstration, I will switch back to SP. And now we're recording in SP once again. Video and audio quality should have returned to their best. And that concludes the recording demonstration of the Emerson VCR765 Orion built 2-head mono VCR from 1990. I will stop the recording and we'll wrap up the video. Well, the first thing I've learned is that I'm going to throw away that tape, because that tape is full of damage and dropouts unrelated to anything I've ever done to it. I've never really used this tape until I used it on the Samsung built RCA VCR, which messed it right up at the beginning part, but looks like it even has dropouts and stuff in the middle of it, parts that I've never ever recorded over, so this tape is just kind of bad in general, which I'm not surprised. It's one of my oldest tapes. I never realized how problematic it was because I've never used it. So this tape will be garbage. But the other thing I learned is that this is a great VCR. I really love this thing. It's really cool to finally experience an early Orion VCR. I love Orion's later VCRs made around the turn of the century. To me, they are, in my opinion at least, they are the most bulletproof VCRs you can buy. If you want a VCR that's very likely to work perfectly and stay working perfectly for years to come, a later Orion VCR is the way to go. But this older Orion VCR is really, really cool. I really like it. I love the design of it. That yellow VFD display and the layout of it. I really love it. I love that it's front panel programmable. You only need the remote for a couple of things. And if it keeps working as well as it is right now, I will buy a remote for this. Very nicely, remotes for this particular VCR are very common and very cheap on eBay. There's dozens of them on eBay. So I'll buy a remote for this thing if it keeps working well throughout my testing. But other than that, that's all there is to show with this VCR from 1990. I am really glad I picked this up for $5 at an estate sale. I really like it. It's very unique. I just love older VCRs. And I think this is going to be a great replacement for the RCA VPT292 because I think I'm gonna get rid of that VCR. The pinch roller is completely bad on it. I actually removed the pinch roller. I had to drill out the screw that you unscrew to take it out was completely stripped, so I had to drill it out and remove the pinch roller. And I don't know if it would ever be possible to put a pinch roller back on it, so I'm going to offer it up to parts, to anybody who wants it for parts. I'll probably make another video. I'll make a final video of that before I toss it. I'll offer it up on a couple of Facebook groups I'm on. But if nobody takes it for parts for the cost of shipping, I'm just going to throw it away, and this thing will be its spiritual replacement. But other than that bit of sadness, I'm really happy to have this VCR. It's very cool, and I hope you enjoyed this overview of it and demonstration. And I'll see you guys in the next video.